Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Hibiscus Motorsports. Today we're going to be doing another Let's Talk video, and judging by, in case you don't know what this is, in my hands, we're going to be talking about Swaybars. So, we're going to be discussing OEM versus aftermarket Swaybars. We're going to be discussing what makes certain Swaybars, you know, a little bit more stiff or soft versus others. We're going to be talking about adjustable Swaybars. We're going to be talking about why you might want to change your Swaybars versus if you're doing like circuit racing or drifting, things like that. So yeah, first things first, let's get into talking about OEM versus aftermarket and go from there. So without further ado, let's get on it. Alrighty, so starting off with first, what is a Swaybar? In front of us we have my stock front Swaybar off my Miata. As you can see, it will connect to both sides. And the whole point of a Swaybar, to make it very, very simple and easy to understand, think of this as a big spring where it connects to both sides, the right and left side of the car's suspension. Most cars will have one in the front and rear. Some cars don't. Maybe they'll have like one and not the other. But majority of cars on the road nowadays will have a front and rear Swaybar. These help reduce lateral forces. So, aka it's body roll. So when you take a corner in your car, if you don't know what body roll is, that's when your car will kind of lean to one side or the other. So the whole point of Swaybars is to help reduce that. And also they can give you handling characteristics, you know, versus for different things, why you might want to, you know, go with a bigger Swaybar, a smaller Swaybar, things like that. We'll get into all of that when we actually go up into the Miata to show the new Swaybar that I have on there. But yeah, so just very, very simply, they are just a spring style. It's like a spring torsion bar that just connects both sides together to make the car a little bit more predictable on how it will handle and help reduce body roll. You know, the one really nice thing about building your car for on-track racing is when you think about ways to make it easy to disassemble it. And one of the ways that I thought about it, it's a little bit stiff without the hood open, is a quick release bumper. It's been a little while since I've taken it off, so it's a little stiff, but being able to pull the front bumper of a car off is super useful for a lot of different things. So I just have to disconnect all the little lights and it will come right off. The whole reason I'm doing that is just so we can actually get to the Swaybar a little bit easier. Alrighty, so this will be the first angle I'll show of the aftermarket front Swaybar in my car. So what I have is a Racing Beat tubular front Swaybar. The reason why I specify it's tubular is that these Swaybars are hollow through the inside. Obviously, that's what tubular means. It saves weight because Swaybars are relatively heavy, and it also helps the Swaybar to resist the lateral loads that are placed on it and help reduce body roll. Now, along with Swaybars, the other very important thing is your Swaybar End Links. And if you don't know, this is a Swaybar End Link right here. These are adjustable Swaybar End Links that I have. So the whole point of adjustable Swaybar End Links is that think about your Swaybar like a spring, because that's effectively what it does. So once you put a new Swaybar in, you don't want any what's called preload on these, which if you don't know what preload is, it's simply just putting force already on this without applying any force. So just if you used OEM Swaybar End Links, this might be slightly twisted or something like that, and that can just negatively impact how the car handles. So these effectively are just kind of like a threaded rod that allow you to adjust the height and just make sure there's absolutely no preload on the spring. Another very important part too is to remember is that if you're going to be putting these style Swaybars on your car, make sure that the car is on the ground and under the weight, and all the weight, sorry, is on the suspension, as that is the way you can get the most effective setup. I didn't do that originally. I adjusted them when the car was in the air, and long story short, it really messes with it. So definitely when it's on the ground, for anybody who's curious about, you know, installing a Swaybar. So now I'm going to we'll be able to see this from the top when I pop the hood, and we're going to compare it to the OEM one. Quick little side note from our Swaybar talk. Don't you love when you spend a bunch of time and effort on putting high heat resistant paint on your valve cover, making sure it cures really nicely, all that, just for winter to come and cause it to get absolutely destroyed? This happened last year, and I do have plans to get this valve cover powder coated and or powder coat it myself, depending. So yeah, just quick little side note, if you're on the fence about powder coating, definitely it's definitely a lot better than high heat resistant paint. Alrighty, now back to our Swaybar talk. I'm sorry, there's really no good way to show it, but that red bar down there that you can see, as you can kind of see, it goes across the car. You can see it goes from each side to side. So that sway bar is roughly about twice the thickness of the OEM front sway bar. Now you might be asking yourself, why would you want to actually upgrade that? Like, what does a larger sway bar do? So a larger sway bar, think about it as if it's almost like a bigger spring, and it's a stiffer spring. So when you turn the actual wheel to turn the car, it's going to have a lot less body roll with that massive sway bar in there versus this little one. I did one track day, my first ever track day. I had this sway bar in, and my car was oversteering like crazy. And once I put in the larger front sway bar, it was not oversteering really at all. That might sound confusing, why changing something in the front would be affecting if the car is oversteering or not. So, without further ado, let's get into the benefit of oversteer and understeer with sway bars. Alrighty, we are back at the little, I guess, tech talk table. I don't really know, but so let's discuss the point of sway bars on oversteer and understeer. So as I just previously mentioned, putting a larger front sway bar in my car helped to reduce oversteer. Now, if you don't know what oversteer is oversteer and understeer go hand in hand. Oversteer is when you turn the wheel and the car wants to turn more than what you're putting as turning input, so the rear end of the car will begin to slide out. It's also known as fishtailing. And understeering is when you turn the wheel and the car doesn't turn. It just keeps going straight or doesn't turn as much as your steering input is. So sway bars play a huge factor in that. So how the rule of thumb basically goes is when you upgrade your front sway bar, you are helping to promote understeer and reducing oversteer. Now, why would you want to help promote one instead of the other? Or why would you want to help promote just either of them in general? It's really simple. Certain cars, like the Miata, for example, have a very close to 50-50 weight distribution, which means the front half and the rear half of the car weigh the same. And with it being a rear-wheel drive car, usually the force will make those cars, if you've ever driven one, make them a little bit rear-end happy with the OEM sway bars still. So by stiffening up the front to help produce, or promote understeer rather, sorry, it helps to negate the oversteer aspect, where if you promote understeer, the chance of oversteer happening will reduce, and vice versa. If you promote oversteer, the chance of understeer happening will reduce. So the reason why is, if you're making the car where when you want to turn the wheel and it wants to keep going straight, if you help promote that in the car, the rear end will not try to slide out. You won't get as much rotation of the car when you turn the wheel. And same thing where if you stiffen up the rear end of the car with a bigger sway bar, where if your car, especially in like a front wheel drive application, if your car is trying to understeer a lot, when you turn the wheel, having the rear end try to slide out on you will help you rotate the car around the corner and will help to reduce the oversteer, as if the rear end is beginning to come out on the car, it won't want to understeer as much, it would rather just make its way through the corner. So just as a specific example, on Miatas, they don't really tend to understeer that much from factory. It's really just oversteering. So you put usually if you're building a racing one like I am, you put a massive front sway bar on. Usually most people go for the Racing Beat one. There are other good brands out there that make them, but I went for Racing Beat. That's what a lot of spec Miata guys run, so I just trust it, and I personally love that sway bar. It's also very reasonably priced, so it's another good benefit. But yeah, so that's just a quick little example as far as why you might want to stiffen up the front or rear. So I know, for example, like I said, a lot of front wheel drive car guys, like one of my buddies has a Honda Civic Si, and he just put on only a rear sway bar, as when he takes his car on the track the same days I do, he obviously, like most front-wheel drive applications do, he was experiencing a lot of understeer, and now having his sway bar on, it's really not understeering much at all. It's, if anything, the rear end is beginning to oversteer, and oversteer in a front-wheel drive car is very, very easy to handle. So now let's get into maybe the different types of sway bars. For example, adjustable sway bars. This one is not. This is a one style mount. Let's get into talking about those and the applications of why you might want certain sway bars over others. Alrighty, so as you can see right here, this is where the actual Swaybar end link would bolt to the sway bar. Now this is just a one mount. There's only one setting on the sway bar. On my Racing Beat one in the Miata as well, it is only one setting, but if you look online, you can see a lot of companies make sway bars where these end tabs will be longer and it will have maybe, I'd say, anywhere from 1 to 4 holes on them. So the point of those style sway bars is if you hold the sway bar, let's say here versus here, if you hold it right here, this is reducing your mechanical leverage that you have over this actual spring, because remember, sway bars function very similar to springs, as that is effectively what they are. They're effectively just springs. So if you hold it closer to where the actual spring is, you are reducing your mechanical advantage and leverage, which makes this stiffer. It makes it harder to move this, which will help reduce body roll. And if you hold them out further, that'll give you more mechanical leverage, more advantage, and will actually make this a little bit softer. Now, why would you want to make it softer than, harder? If I was just talking about how there's the benefits of running what seems like the biggest sway bar you can. So there are definitely some drawbacks where if your sway bar is too large for your application, or in that case, if you're holding it too tight and making it too stiff, you can actually have too much of a good thing. So let's say, as an example, in a Miata, where you have a massive front sway bar and the stock OEM rear sway bar like what I have, if you have one that is too large in the front, you will be promoting understeer too much to the point where the car will begin to actually understeer. And same thing vice versa with a rear sway bar, where if you are trying to reduce understeer and you put a massive rear sway bar, make it as stiff as you can be, all that, you might actually promote oversteer too much to the point where it could make you be spinning out, or you're losing, seconds on the track, things like that. So definitely, it's those types of sway bars. The adjustment are nice, where you can kind of mess around with the settings, find what you like. The reason why, ones like mine don't have that is they come pre-tuned from factory. Like for mine, Racing Beat has it set up exactly so they know it's going to handle perfectly, and I have no complaints about it. So that's just another style of sway bar. Obviously, every car's sway bars will look different depending on what type of suspension setup it has. We'll talk about suspension in a future Let's Talk video, going over things like that. But yeah, so that's why you might want an adjustable sway bar over none. Alrighty, so now let's talk about some real-world applications for larger front and rear sway bars. So we're going to start off with track days and racing and all that, and we're going to use the Miata as an example, just because that's what I'm familiar with. So from being on the track and all that, seeing other people's cars, other Miatas, I've come to notice 3 main setups that people like for sway bars. So you have the people who run, like me, who have a larger front sway bar and a OEM rear sway bar. As again, those cars don't really understeer too much from factory, so the larger front sway bar is really helping to reduce the oversteer, and it's overall, in my opinion, that's the only setup I've ran so far, but I really enjoy it. You have the people who take it one step further, who run a larger front sway bar and no rear sway bar. The whole point of that is to try to eliminate oversteer even more. And then people who like to try to keep it a little bit more balanced, where they run a larger front and rear sway bar, as the whole point of that is that's more of a jack-of-all-trades style setup, where, for example, if you had a massive front sway bar and no rear sway bar, when your car would begin to understeer, it will understeer a lot heavier than a car with, let's say, a large front and large rear sway bar. By no means are any of the setups really better. It's all just kind of what fits your driving style and preferences. Like I said, I've only ever tried the setup that I run with the large front and the OEM rear sway bar. Who knows, maybe I would like another setup, but I personally like how it handles it. You know, it's really predictable on the track, so I'm going to stick with that. So now another form of motorsports that people love is drifting. So in drifting, the whole point is to get the rear end of the car to kick out, and it's a controlled oversteer. So basically, in a lot of drift cars, not everyone, but a lot of people will do is they will run no front sway bar and a massive rear sway bar, the exact opposite of like what people do for Miatas for the track. So the reasoning for that is with no front sway bar, it'll help to eliminate most of the understeer and anything like that. As again, if you completely delete understeer from the actual equation, now again, not that it will completely get rid of it, but it'll get rid of most of the car trying to help promote it and help promote oversteer. It'll make, you know, actually getting the rear end of the car to kick out and slide just that much easier, things like that. So I know not everybody does that. A lot of people either will run just no sway bars in general for drifting and just do it all through the car's power, brakes, things like that. Or just, you know, maybe they just keep sway bars stock or run big beefy sway bars. It really just kind of comes down to your preference, what you prefer when it comes to them. But those are just, you know, some of the most common setups for both racing and drifting. Alrighty, so now moving on to a form of motorsports that I wouldn't say sway bars are as important in, but they still definitely serve a role, is off-roading. Now you might be asking yourself, why would you need to worry about a sway bar for oversteering and understeering when you go off-roading, as doesn't really imply for that. Remember, as we said previously in this Let's Talk, that sway bars also are a spring to help reduce body roll. So when you are actually, let's say you're rock crawling and your car is beginning to go over a rock, your suspension is still working as if you are taking a turn. So the sway bar will help to reduce body roll. I know some guys like to run quick release Swaybar End Links, where if they're trying to go over really intense terrain, their sway bar could work against them and maybe not let their actual suspension lift and compress as much as it needs to. So it's definitely, I wouldn't say as important as something like track racing for sway bars, where they are an extremely important part of your suspension, because as you know, people know and all that, is your suspension is not just your springs, your shocks, your coilovers, all that, you know. It's you know, everything. It's going to be your those components going to be the geometry compared to your control arms. It's going to be your sway bars, all that kinds of stuff. So that's, you know, that's just another example of sway bars in the real world for motorsports. Alrighty, now I'm just going to talk about something really simple. Is these brackets right here are what actually hold your sway bar to the chassis of the car. And then inside of these, as you can see, there is a rubber bushing. Now, my car, when I took this off, had, I'd say, roughly about maybe 71,000 miles on it. So these didn't experience a ton of abuse over their life, but they are rubber. And obviously, as we know, rubber can get old and dry rot and crack and all that. So if you are driving your car and you're noticing maybe it's rocking back and forth too much body roll than usual, these are definitely a good place to start looking at, as sway bars usually don't go bad. I'd say it's just a metal bar. Maybe if they begin to rust and rot, then it would be definitely good to look at replacing them. But these types of bushings are what really go bad in them. Most sway bars have two in total, one just for each side, and then where they bolt for the actual end links. In any racing performance application, most companies, for example, like my Racing Beat one, I got new brackets of these, and then they send you, in that kit, I got polyurethane bushings. They're just a lot stiffer and all that, make it, the sway bar not be able to move around as much, because these style bushings are designed to help reduce NVH, which is noise, vibration, and harshness, as that's what any form of a rubber bushing in your car is for. So upgrading to polyurethane does promote NVH a little bit more. It makes it, you know, a little bit more noisy, a little bit, you know, things vibrate more, all that. But it makes it stiffer, so your sway bar will act a little bit more predictably. So yeah, just a quick little added little bonus thing about them is these actual mounts and the bushings inside of them. Alrighty guys, that's going to do it for this video. If you learned anything about it, leave it down in the comments below. Also, if I forgot anything or missed anything that you know that I didn't say, also leave that down below. I'm sure there's something or some multiple things, just because there's so much information out there on these. Overall, they they're very, very overlooked. It's just a simple little metal bar that sometimes has some really weird turns and twists, and I know some cars have like U-turns in their sway bars and stuff, but overall they're very important, especially in today's day and age where we're moving towards things more people driving SUVs and crossovers. Those cars are taller, and without sway bars we could be having a lot more rollover incidents and all that, because when those cars begin to lean with body roll, it's a lot of weight, and you know, those cars are usually tall and sometimes wide, but most of the time they're not much wider than your average sedan. So definitely sway bars, very important for helping to reduce things like rollovers and all that. But yeah, so I know it doesn't look like much, but these little bars definitely play a huge impact in day-to-day driving, and play an even bigger one in motorsports and competition racing and all things like that. So yeah, that's really about it. So if you enjoyed the video, guys, don't forget to leave it a like and leave a comment down below. If you really enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. It would really, really help me out. That's the best way to support the channel. Then yeah, that's really about it. So thank you so much for watching, guys. See you in the next video. Peace.